All right, here we go. You're good, Michelle.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Fort. I'm an associate professor at SUNY Empire. And I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Kelly Hermann, which PS, the easiest job in the world is to introduce someone who's just put a bunch of candy on tables. So that, right, she's starting out on a good note. Sorry, virtual audience, please get your own candy. Um, Kelly Hermann is the Vice President of Accessibility, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Phoenix. She leads transformative initiatives in educational accessibility and inclusion. She has a background in communication sciences from the College of St. Rose. And as such, she brings broad perspective and expertise in making educational accessible to all learners, including but not limited to overseeing disability services and ensuring awareness of what inclusive environments for students, faculty, and staff can actually mean, right? Because when we mean accessible and inclusive, we mean accessible and inclusive for all. She has won numerous awards. She's served on numerous boards and councils, including chairing committees for AHEAD and One Ed Tech. And she earned a 2020 IMS Global Award for Higher Ed Leadership. So that's the formal introduction. The informal introduction is that, is that Kelly and I were colleagues at SUNY Empire for 12 years. And so as such, she knows our SUNY system well. And she has helped many campuses in our system look at their accessibility, look at their project processes. We were just in the back talking with one of our colleagues about how to mend and ensure that accessibility is at the forefront of campus work. So please help me, help you, help us welcome Kelly to SUNY. You're welcome.
Appreciate it, my friend. All right, I'm a lot taller than Michelle. I'm also a 6 foot tall redhead, so I don't blend into a crowd. So for those of you who are here, I'll be here through tomorrow. You're not going to miss me. Feel free to come up to me. And if any of you who are online ever come across me in a conference or whatnot, please feel free to come up and ask questions for sure. Yeah, there's a couple of shticks that I have that, you all are going to be subject to this afternoon, which is probably good considering that it is later in the day and we're all probably a little bit tired, which hence why, for those of you in the room, there is candy. I'm not above bribery. And for those of you who are online, I encourage you when we take a break, because we will take a break because nobody wants to listen to me talk for that many hours in a row without a break. Get your favorite candy because you know what? Life is too short not to have something sweet. All right, so let's double check. We can see the slides in the room because I can verify that by looking. My online audience, are you seeing the slides?
We're seeing it, but it is not in presentation mode. It looks like it might be stuck loading. So maybe try to unshare and reshare it.
Fabulous. All right. All right, I just advanced the slide. Did that change anything on the online side?
It did not.
All right. You know what? Zoom is so much fun. I always joke as somebody who works with disability on the regular that I usually bring a disability and infect the technology. And apparently today I did it while I was sitting in the back of the room since we've been having some technical challenges here. All right, let's try this again. Okay. Let's go into presentation mode. Yep.
You may want to put it in presentation mode before you share your screen.
Okay. All right. Technology is so much fun. Yep. Hang on. Talk amongst yourselves.
There we go.
Six.
That looks, yeah, that's good.
Success? All
Yes.
right. Hang on though. Let's not get too excited yet because I haven't tried to advance the slide. Are we ready? Brace yourselves. Did it advance on the Zoom?
It did
Well,
not.
I'm from downstate New York. I grew up an hour north of New York City, so I have that blunt, pessimistic kind of attitude that I naturally go towards. All right. I use the arrow button, which should work. I can't see it now because it's up there. Oh, hang on. Did we advance it on Zoom?
Yes, it did.
All right, awesome. So for those of you on the Zoom meeting and in the room, one of the things that I like to do when we are doing one of these hybrid kind of things where we have people on Zoom and we have people in the room is to teach you how to applaud in ASL, because those of you who are on Zoom, we're doing it in the room, people know you can't hear applause when you're on Zoom. So you raise your hands in the air, with your palms up, and then you shake your palms. That is applause in ASL because deaf people can't hear either. So that you have to have a way to signify applause. And I can't see that anyways because I can't see the Zoom interface on the desktop, but we're just going to go with it for right now because it's working. Okay, so what are we going to do today? And why on earth is this redhead, 6 foot tall redhead that's talking to you today about accessibility doing it by using candy? Well, because I happen to have a sweet tooth. I did not amass this body size over these almost 50 years on this planet without having a sweet tooth. And so I'd like to share that with others. I'm a former RA, so I understand that if you feed them, they will come and they'll pay more attention to you and they're more likely to like you. And also because there's some catchy slogans that come with some of these candy bars, and I want you to remember this as you leave. And I think, the other piece is let's make it fun, because who here, other than me, thinks accessibility is a lot of fun? Oh, we have some brave people in the room raising their hands. Thank you. But most of you are not. And I totally get that. So we're trying to make it so that, let's have fun with this information. There's a lot of stress and anxiety in the world. Let's make this one a little bit less stressful and a little bit less anxiety filled. So our agenda today, we're going to talk first about your candy dish. And that's some of the foundations of working with accessibility and with, people who have disabilities. We're also going to talk about special dark. And the way that this presentation first evolved is I used this as a faculty disability awareness presentation, and I held up the candy bars and I said, what do you think I learned about disability from Special Dark? Well, this is a nod to special education, which is included within the law. So we'll use that here and we'll talk about Special Dark and when we talk about the law and the regulations. Now, caveat on that, I am not an attorney. I just play one on TV or on Zoom meetings, only as it relates to ADA, 504, and FERPA. So don't take anything that I say as legal advice. It's going to keep you clear in court. And now all of my attorney friends will be happy with me. We're going to talk about Twix and the shift left. We're also going to talk about Reese's peanut butter cups and the collaboration that you need to have on campus. We're going to talk about Three Musketeers, my very personal favorite candy bar that a lot of my friends give me crap about, quite frankly, because they're like, that is the sorriest excuse for a candy bar ever. I like simple, folks. And, so it works for me. But Three Musketeers here, we're going to talk about data, evaluation, and communication. And then we're going to talk about M&Ms and going back to basics, because what's more basic than an M&M? And then we're going to talk about Skittles, tasting the rainbow, and how you're going to put all of this that we're going to talk about today, your accessibility strategy, into implementation and practice. And then we're going to finish up with a lesson from Mr. Owl and the Tootsie Pop. Okay, any questions? All right, let's make sure my mouse is still over there, so I'll advance my slides. Did it advance? All right, I promise I will stop checking. Maybe not. But before we get started, let me talk to you a little bit about language. One of the things that I think is really important to highlight is the disability community. And the disability community is heterogeneous, meaning they're not the same. There's lots of different reasons why a person may be considered a qualified person with a disability, and they may think about their experiences very, very differently than someone else. And so what you're going to hear me do today, and this is why it's important, I want to call this out, because I see a lot of people in the room who likely went through a very similar bachelor's and master's programs like I did as somebody who trained to be a speech therapist, where you were taught and it was hammered into your head that you use person first language, and that you said phrases like a person with a disability, a person who is blind. You put the person first and the diagnosis or the disability category second. There are some folks in the disability community who prefer identity first language and would prefer that you call them autistic, that you say they're a blind person or a disabled person. And sometimes for those of us who went through our programs where we were taught person first language, we feel that that's disrespectful, and it's actually not. And I don't know who's in my audience. I don't know. I know a few of you, but I don't know if I have any members of the disability community who are sitting here in this room in front of me, or who's sitting in front of their computers online listening to this. So you're going to hear me use both. And I do that and I call attention to it because I don't want someone sitting there who went through similar kind of academic training like I did to say, what is she doing? Like, she's supposed to be somebody who has expertise and she's saying disabled person. Like, how rude and how insensitive. So I want you to know that that's the reason why I do it, so that, number one, I want you to get called attention to, because one of the things that I see that's unfortunate is when somebody who, claims to be an ally and an advocate corrects a disabled person when they use that language. That's not yours to correct. That's their experience. And so I want to make sure that we call attention to that, because it's part of the ongoing understand that people have different perspectives. That is really, really important. The other thing I want to call attention here is to this image, which is really difficult to see, I think probably on the screen, but this comes from the Smithsonian exhibit on the disability rights movement. And it's an individual who's sitting in a wheelchair in front of a bus with other, very visibly, of visibly disabled individuals. And on the back of his wheelchair is a sign that says, I can't even get to the back of the bus. And I want to call your attention to that, because I think sometimes we forget that the fight for disability rights was a civil rights fight. And that there were lots of wins that the disability rights movement got after the civil rights movement. But it's the same thing that we're dealing with and that we're working on. We're thinking about anti-discrimination. We're thinking about the right to access. We're thinking about, all of the things, that don't make snap judgments based on what you see of a person. So I'd like to include some of these images as well, because it's important to understand the history. Okay. All right. Couple other things. We're going to move on to the candy dish, and we're going to talk about the foundations. If you have questions, Alex has a microphone here in the room so that we can make sure that everyone who is online can hear your question and that I don't have to repeat it. If you have a question online, I know we've got a couple of folks who are working as moderators for us in the online space. Please ask your questions as we go. I am okay being interrupted. And if you have a question about something that we're talking about, I would rather answer that question now than, to save it for the end, because quite frankly, I might forget what I was talking about and I might have a hard time going back to it at that point in time. And if it's, a question that's on your mind, I want you to get that answer while you're thinking about it so that it's not distracting you from the rest of the presentation. So, the folks who are moderating for us on Zoom, feel free to use your voice of God and, for us here in the room, and tell us that we have a question, and I will pause. All right, the candy dish. So this is where we're going to talk a little bit about some of the foundations of this work. But first, I have a quiz. Pop quiz. You don't get extended time. You don't need any study aids, and you don't need a separate room to take this quiz. But for those of you who are in the room, I want you to shout it out. And those of you who are online on Zoom, you can feel free to put it in the chat. True or false? My institution bought whatever, insert whatever accessibility tool that you want to, insert there. We're all set, and I don't have to worry about accessibility anymore. False. I'm hearing a lot of falses. Are we seeing some falses online too?
100% false on all online.
You all get a gold star. It is 100% false. 100% false. And I like to start out with that one because what we're talking about here today, yes, I'm trying to distract you with the candy. I'm trying to make it more memorable with the candy, right? But really what we're talking about is your accessibility strategy. And there are multiple components to an accessibility strategy. I will talk a little bit about tools and how we deploy tools, but your tool is not your strategy. If you have SortSite, if you have Ally, if you use Microsoft Accessibility Checkers, if you do any of those things, it does not mean that you're good. You still have work to do. And the reality of it is, and I put up this image, some of you may remember back in the early days, the Bobby approved, that we used to see. Well, one of the things that was, really problematic about the early checkers is you could fool it. You can still fool it because if you have an image and you just put a string of characters that don't mean anything into the alt text box, it's going to think you have alt text. Now, AI is helping with that a little bit because that technology is advancing, but it would tell you that that image was good. But meanwhile, somebody who had a disability and using a screen reader would not have access to that. So it's really important, for you to recognize that even the most sophisticated AI-enabled, cutting edge, just out of the box in 2025 tool can be fooled and may not be accessible. And the other thing that we'll talk about throughout the afternoon as well is that there's individual differences that come into play. So I can build a course with my instructional design team, and I can, that it can meet all of the web content accessibility guidelines. It will look at face value like no student should have a problem. And I guarantee you one of the 15,000 students that I accommodate every year at the University of Phoenix will have a problem with that course and still need additional modifications on top of the accessibility. Because disability is an individual experience. It does not affect two people exactly the same. So with that as a premise, I think I got everything on there. Yep, okay. What is disability? I think it's important for us to know what we're talking about. And the disability, the ADA definition of a disability, this comes from the ADA Amendments Act, which was passed in 2008. And I remember reading that, press release and seeing all the guidance that came out from the Department of Justice when they updated, and all of the information from OCR and about Section 504, because they updated it at the same time. And they put in common sense as a major life activity and thinking as a major life activity. Actually, it was thinking, not common sense. And I was like, oh, good Lord, that's going to be a little bit difficult because I know a lot of people who have impaired thinking, but aren't necessarily disabled, right? So what does this mean? Essentially, what it means is that a person can be a qualified person with a disability under the law pretty much anytime that they have a diagnosis, if it impairs their ability to perform one or more major life activities. That's what makes it a disability. It does not necessarily make it a disability just because they have a diagnosis. So we had a student, we've actually had a lot of students who, said to us in our student accommodations office, I have high blood pressure. Okay, so you have a diagnosis. Hypertension is a diagnosis. Sometimes it is disabling, other times it's not. So how do you figure that out? You have that conversation with the student and you find out how it impacts them. What are the side effects? How is the disability experience affecting them day in and day out? And that's how you determine whether or not someone is qualified and needs accommodations or needs protection from discrimination under the law. So major life activities can include reproduction. It can include digestion. It can include seeing, walking, breathing. All of the things that we do day in and day out can rise to the level of being a major life activity. One question that comes up a lot is whether or not test anxiety is a disability. Those of you who are at more traditional campuses, I know we're talking about online today, but at more traditional campuses, we would get this request a lot. I have test anxiety. Okay, but does your anxiety persist into other situations? Because that's very situation dependent. It likely does not rise to the level of being a disability if you only have the anxiety because of the test. And whereas generalized anxiety is in multiple situations, that is going to rise to the level of being a disability. And then of course you then start thinking about what those accommodations are. Okay. So what is accessibility? So accessibility is when a person with a disability can engage in the same interactions, get the same information, and enjoy the same services as a person without a disability in an equally effective manner with substantially equivalent ease of use. I just said a lot of words that strike fear into the heart of people who do what I do for a living. Because there are a lot of times that we have used accommodation strategies that were not substantially equivalent in their ease of use. Has anyone here ever used a PDF file instead of a textbook, a printed textbook? Super easy or not so easy? I'm seeing some head nods, in terms of saying, nope, not so much, not so easy. And the reason why it's not so easy is because not all PDFs are created equal and they're not always accessible, right? And also there are certain things that you can do with a physical book if you have the dexterity to do it that are difficult to do if that electronic text file is not formatted properly, such as flipping to a specific page and seeing a specific, heading. If the PDF is created the way it should be, that should be a relatively easy thing to do. But if you needed to use a Braille version of a book, that's not going to be as easy as using a printed version of the book. Number one, it's going to be a lot bigger. And it's going to take, because Braille by itself is a much larger format, but also it's incredibly difficult to get and to make sure that it's formatted properly. So there's a lot of reasons why when this definition came out, we all got really nervous because we were like, okay, how are we going to do this? And especially when you start thinking about all of the various types of content that can go into online courses and traditional courses that are now going to need to be made accessible because there still is, but when this first came out in 2008, 2009 with the Kindle cases, a lot of our content was designed and then sent to us to review to see if it's accessible. It was not designed with accessibility in mind. And so that's and I'm sure that still happens on a lot of your campuses today. It still happens at the University of Phoenix. And we've been doing online since 1976, I think. So it still is a problem. Okay. And the other component of, it being accessible is the person being able to be independent. So a lot of times, folks will say, well, we can't make that file accessible. Can't you just hire a reader for the student? Well, now the student is dependent on another person to read the file aloud to them. That's not independent. That's not substantially equivalent ease of use. And, it's not going to rise to the level where we're going to say that that's accessible. That might be our stopgap. Like that's what we have to do while we're making the file accessible for the student, but that shouldn't be our first strategy. All right. Okay, so let's talk about setting the scene here and the who, the what, the when, and the where. So, oh, this is really small. Sorry, folks. We'll share the slides out. I was hoping that this was going to be a little bit bigger. When you ask accessibility related questions, it's really important, to be thinking through what is the tool going to be used for? How is it, who's the intended audience, how it's going to be deployed, because that's going to lead you to some of the questions that you need to be able to ask. And also, we're going to talk a little bit more in a minute about, building your coalition and building your team, because you can't do this alone. This is not just the responsibility of the disability services or the accessibility coordinator, if you have one on your campus. This is everybody. If you create content, if you send an email, if you share anything in a learning management system, whatever you do, you're creating content that others have to access. So therefore, it has to be made accessible. So we need to know, when are you going to ask those questions? So this is really important, especially, you've heard earlier today about the Title II, regulations that are coming. And for most of the SUNY campuses, because the population size is based on where you are supporting your population, it's not the population of your institution. So if you are at a community college and the county that you're serving is more than 50,000 people, you have to comply with those regulations by April of 2026. And so you're likely signing contracts, or your college colleagues are signing contracts right now that could potentially get you in some trouble come April of 2026 if the tools are not accessible. So we also need to know where the stakeholders are, who's involved in all of these different processes. And it's not just thinking about your courses, it's thinking about everything that you procure on your campus. It's thinking about all of the content that you're developing on your campus. Also, who's responsible when something isn't accessible? That's a really big conversation to have with your vendors and your partners, because I think sometimes we just assume it's going to be us that's going to be responsible for that, but it shouldn't be. You have to have that partnership with those suppliers so that you can make sure that you're getting the support that you need to ensure that the tool and the content is accessible. Why is this important for you, for your department, your class, your institution? Obviously, it's the law, right? But we have students with disabilities on our campuses, and we want our students to access the content that we're sharing. This is the argument I use with faculty all the time. And I'm like, if it's important enough that you feel that you need to share it with your students, then it's important enough to make sure that it's accessible. Because if it's not important enough to make it accessible, if you tell me that's, I have this happen all the time. Michelle and I were just talking about this. Oh, it's okay, Kelly. That's an optional resource. Okay, great. Then you can take it down until we can make it accessible. No, I can't take it down. I want my students to have it. Okay, you have to make a decision now. Is it optional and not important, or is it optional and important? If it's optional and important, we need to make it accessible. If it's unimportant because you're okay with a certain group of students not having access to it, then no student gets access to it and we take it down. That's the decision point that you have to make. It's not oh, here comes the redhead being mean again. No, I'm reacting to what you're telling me. And sometimes it's really important to call out our colleagues on the mixed messages that they're giving you, because if it's important, then it's important for every student, every member of our population to have access to it. And then also consistency. This is one of the hard things. And I think, sometimes people think about it sometimes when it's right in their face and then they forget. What we're talking about today, and what I'm hoping that you're going to take away from this, is that you're really trying to support your colleagues in changing some of their habits. And we're going to talk more about it when we talk about the Twix section and the shift left, and what that means in terms of integrating accessibility into everything that you do. It's not a make it, then make it accessible. Doesn't work that way. It works better, it's less expensive, and it's more efficient when you build it into your processes all along. So it means you have to think about doing some things differently from the get-go. All right. Oh, okay. Some non-negotiables. These are big ones that I talk about a lot at the University of Phoenix. So the first one is accessibility improvements, requirements must improve our content, but also have to be reasonable, sustainable, and achievable. I didn't put reasonable up there. I just ad-libbed that one, but that's important too, right? That's one of the things that I always talk about with my colleagues, is that we need to ensure that what we're doing is something that we can continue to do. Like I said before, consistency is really important. So we want to make sure that what we're asking everyone to do is reasonable. It is reasonable. We talk about that word a lot when we attach it to accommodations, but the accessibility requirements also have to be reasonable. We have to be thinking through, what does this mean? And there's a continuum there, and we're going to talk more about that as we go through the afternoon. All public and student-facing content must meet WCAG guidelines. And WCAG, if I use that vernacular and you're not familiar with that, means the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Sometimes people say WCAG. Sometimes people say WCAG. I've heard WCAG, and I've heard all sorts of things. When I say WCAG, I'm referring to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So that's a non-negotiable at my institution. If you're putting it out on our public-facing site, I don't know who the audience is. I don't know who's in my audience. And therefore, we don't want to slam the door in somebody's face who might want to come to the university before they even get a chance to learn about us, because that's essentially what you're doing. It has to be accessible. Accessibility is considered and integrated into all phases of design development, and it's not saved just for QA or quality assurance at the end of a project. This is one that we're still working on, because I will still have folks say, oh, we had this great design meeting and now we've started to mock things up and now we need your team to come in and look at it. I go, well, you're too late. Why didn't you include us during the design phase? I'm like, we'll look at it, but now you're going to have to do some rework because most likely you didn't integrate some of the things into the design that you could have that we could have told you from the get-go. And it slows them down. They only need to do it a couple times, especially the marketing teams. And then they're like, oh, wait, let's invite the redheads team because she's going to tell us we did it wrong again. So it sometimes it's fun. Not really. Professional development and training should be practical, relevant, and timely. I will die on this hill. You do not go in and train your faculty on the poor principles and all of the success criteria of WCAG. Just don't. They don't need to know that. They are going to, give you that glassy-eyed stare that, of like, there's not enough candy in the world that's going to wake them up. Like, just don't. That's not what they need to know. What they need to know is what are the expectations of the faculty role and how is the content that they share with students supposed to be made accessible when they share it with students. Customize it to the situation. Now, the engineers who work on my website and who work on any of the student products, the technology-enabled tools that we use at the university, we teach them poor. We teach them how to evaluate their content. We teach them what those things mean because they have a different role and they're doing different level of work. So you want to make sure that you are thinking about that context and how to build that in. Decisions regarding the use of tools and content are driven by the learning objectives for the course. This is one that my academic colleagues still struggle with, and it drives me crazy because we'll have a conversation and they'll be like, oh, Kelly, I just went to this conference. By the way, love it when they come to me and they're like, I just went to this conference and there's so many cool things in that exhibit hall. It's like you have to brace yourself when you do my work at the end of conference season because everyone went to a conference, walked through the exhibit hall and found that shiny new fire truck they want under the Christmas tree on Christmas morning. Right? It's what they do. It's exciting. Those sales reps know what they're doing. They're pulling out that shiny new fire truck, and they're going to want you all to, to come back to your institution and say, we need to use this. So what will happen then is they'll say to me, what do you know about how accessible it is? And I was like, well, we can, figure it out. And they're like, okay, cool. Because I saw these other two products in the exhibit hall that do something similar. So if your team can look into all three and then just tell me which one will meet your accessibility standards, that's what we'll go with. And I'm like, whoa, time out. Nope, that's not how we do this. Because in order for me to determine if something is a fundamental alteration, meaning something can be an unreasonable request for an accommodation if it fundamentally alters the content, the product, the course, the activity, the assignment, whatever, insert whatever it is. I have to know what your learning objectives are. It's the same process when you're asking me about a digital tool that you want to integrate into your course. I need to know the learning objective. I need to know how this tool is going to help your students meet that learning objective, because then I'm going to tell you that we're going to evaluate the tool with that in mind and find out, is this a tool that we can integrate into the classroom without any modifications? Is it something that I have to work with the vendor and get their accessibility roadmap and work with them to make improvements? Or is it something that's going to be really, really difficult for us to make accessible, and we have to look at an alternative, assignment for the student when this tool comes up? It does not necessarily mean that if something is not accessible out of the box and can't be made accessible, that we can't use it. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. That might be a hint to a question coming up. Also, we are a team working towards the same goals, objectives, and priorities. We have, at the University of Phoenix, our core values are we're brave, we're honest, and we're focused, which sometimes people use, well, I'm being brave, and they say something really kind of terrible. And you're like, that's not the intent, people. But we also have, these behaviors that, we've been, rolling out with our employees. And one of them is work together, win together. And the idea there is sometimes people need a reminder that you have to be collaborative with each other and you have to be collegial with each other. And so that's one of the ones, like, this is not just the responsibility of my team. This is the university's responsibility. I just happen to be the mouthpiece that gets to tell you when you're screwing it up. By the way, I also tell them when they do a good job. I don't want you to think we do make jokes at my institution about, oh, is New York Kelly coming to that meeting or is regular Kelly coming to that meeting? I'm like, well, just wait till you hear the mom voice. If you hear the mom voice at work, then you know you're really in trouble. Oops, I hit the wrong button. All right, before I move on to the laws and the regulations, any questions? Anything from our Zoom audience?
We're good. No questions.
Okay, awesome. You guys are being really quiet. I may need to enlist Michelle with her idea earlier of a conga line through the room. So yeah, I know. And we'll have to figure out if we can turn the camera for those of you on Zoom so you can see it. But all right, let's talk a little bit about the laws and the regulations. I love using the example of special dark because I hear this a lot. Well, the special education for kids in college. There is no special education for kids in college. Special education ends in the K through 12 system or when the person turns 21 if they are still in the K through 12 system. And the reason that is because that special education is a feature of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. It only applies to K through 12. Actually, it applies from birth to 21. But in our context, once the student leaves the K through 12 system, IDEA no longer applies to them. Okay? So I want to make sure that we're clear on that. I don't want to hear anything about your special students. All students are special. Students with disabilities are not the special ones. Believe me, there are lots of reasons why students are special. There's lots of reasons why faculty and staff are special too, but we won't get into that. But every person's special. This special education is not something that exists in higher education. Okay. Oh, I hit the wrong one again. That's what happens when I don't really look at what I'm doing. Okay. All right. I told you, I already gave you the answer to this one. True or false? Every piece of content I want to share with students has to be accessible or I can't use it. False, right? Well, actually, I qualified this one. It can be both true and false. Trick question. Sorry. I even tricked myself on that one, which is really kind of amusing considering that I put the finishing touches and I added this slide this morning. So you would think that I would remember what I wrote. But my excuse is I live in Arizona now. It is actually, my body thinks it's 2 hours earlier than it actually is. And by the way, it's only for very special SUNY colleagues that I would leave my house in Arizona to come to Syracuse, where it is 40 degrees. Do we want to know what do we really? I mean, I will tell you, do you want to know what the temperature is at my house right now? 74 higher. It's 83 today in Arizona. Huh? Yep. I am no longer in the mood where 40 degrees in February feels warm to me. I've lived in Arizona for 8 years now. All right. Okay. Right. So there is a difference, and this is what we were talking about earlier, between accessibility and accommodations. So, right, I said to you earlier, I can design the most beautifully accessible course. I am still going to have students who are going to have difficulty with it. They're going to have difficulty both from an interaction with the assistive technology if they use it. They're going to need accommodations. And let's just put the other misnomer out there right now. A universally designed course does not absolve your need to provide accommodations. Okay. I'm going to make you guys all make me some promises before you leave here today. That might be the first one. A universally designed course does not absolve you from needing to make accommodations. So if you have folks who are trying to implement universal design for learning or whatever flavor of UD in theory that you're subscribing to, And they try to tell you that we're just going to make all tests 5 hours long because no student has ever taken more than 2.5, 3 hours to do it, say no. Because the student with a disability who has extended time has to get double time if that's their accommodation on the 5 hours. It does not work the way you think it does. Okay? All right. That was totally an aside. I didn't plan on saying that one. How you prioritize the content and the accessibility always, always, always comes back to the learning objectives. And I've had to train my deans on this because what would happen was I would go to them and say, hey, I've got this student, Joe Smith or whatever, and this is the deal. And this is the difficulty they're having with this assignment. This is what they asked me for. And they'll invariably go, well, Kelly, whatever you think we need to do, we will do. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm telling you what the situation is because I need you to tell me what the learning objectives are for that assignment. If you're in a course where one of the learning objectives is to demonstrate in writing your mastery of the subject, all day long, I'm expecting you to tell me when a student comes to me and says, I need to do an oral presentation because I don't want to write this paper, that you're going to agree and say, my learning objective is that the student has to demonstrate in written English, standard written English, the course concepts. And so I cannot make this assignment an oral presentation. That's the answer. That's the right answer. It's not because the disability person came to you and said, hey, what can we do, that you just give them whatever they want. That's what the student's hoping you're going to do. By the way, that's why students bring up lawyers. They don't have the money to have lawyers on retainer. Like, if they tell you that, don't be scared by that. Some of you may not have that experience, but they say that to me all the time. I'm calling my attorney. Great. You call yours. I'll call mine. They can go argue the law stuff, but let's figure out what we're going to do with you and the accommodations right now, because that's not a productive part of this conversation. All right. So that's what has to drive that process. Okay. Also, you need to look at what can you do ahead of time. Your videos, I am hard pressed to think of a use case where your videos should not have captions. Hard pressed to think of that. I'm hard pressed to think about why your images shouldn't have alt text. So there are things we know are going to need to happen regardless. Make those accessible first and prioritize that and do that during design and development. There are other things that might be a little bit fuzzier and we have to come up with a strategy around that. All right. Oh, let me hit the right one. Oh, good. I did it. Okay. Again, I am not an attorney, but I know these laws pretty well. So, US federal law. And to date, there have been no executive orders on these laws. There have been no dear colleague letters on these laws. Now, I'm saying that to date because I have not been on anything today that would tell me otherwise. But you have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Section 504, you might be thinking, Kelly, I know students who in K through 12 had a 504 plan. How is this different from IDEI? 504 is a different piece of legislation, and there are different subparts. One that applies to K through 12, and subpart E that I think it's E, that applies to higher education. When it applies to higher education, it is a civil rights law. The ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is a civil rights law, which means the primary purpose of the law is to prevent discrimination on the basis, in this case, on the basis of disability. That is the primary purpose of the law. We provide accommodations for students because if we did not, we would be discriminating against the student with a disability on the basis of disability by not providing them with an academic adjustment in order for them to demonstrate what they've learned in the class. We make things accessible because to deny someone the ability to access information on our website might be considered discriminatory on the basis of disability because they can't access the information as everybody else. So that's breaking it down a little bit about why we do this. The other one that gets thrown around a lot is Section 508. Section 508 of the Rehab Act only applies to the procurement activities of the federal government. And so you may hear vendors talk to you about 508 standards. 508 standards were updated a few years ago to be consistent with the WCAG 2.0 AA, which was a couple of versions ago. And so you might hear vendors talk to you about 508. The VPAT, if you've heard that, the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, and when it's completed, is called an Accessibility Conformance Report. Those are driven by 508. We do ask for those because it's good accessibility documentation that we can review. But again, it applies only to the activities of the federal government. Now, some states, and the last I knew, New York was one of them, have adopted 508. A lot of this is moot for you though, because for those of you who are, working for SUNY, you have Title II of the ADA. And last year, they announced web accessibility rules for Title II of the ADA. And essentially what the web accessibility rules, and I think I have a slide on this coming up next, means that your websites and your mobile applications, including your learning management system and your online courses, have to comply with WCAG 2.1 AA. We're going to talk more about that in a second. Okay, so for the Title II regs, I am not going to go through all of the exceptions. There are people who are a lot smarter than me about these, who have done a lot of resources. I saw Kim sharing links earlier about some of the webinars and things that you all have access to. So I'm not going to go through those because I want to talk and get to the point where we start talking about strategy and things that you all can do, bless you, on your campuses and the things that will have real impact. So I'm not going to talk about all of those. If you have questions about those, I can help you navigate to those resources. But what you need to know is the April 2026 deadline. If your institution, which I believe would, and I think they have a website for you to look at from what I understood from Kim's presentation this morning, I'd be hard pressed to think of a SUNY that did not have a population area that they draw from that is more than 50,000 people. I do think some of the smaller community colleges might, have the extra year, but I would be really surprised, if there are. So that means that by April of 2026, you have to make sure that your websites and your mobile applications comply with these regulations. Private institutions. Do we have anyone here other than me who's at a private institution? We might have on the online group because I know it's a bigger group. Doesn't look like anybody in the room. Okay, if you are at a private institution, either you're joining us live online, or if you're watching this recording later on, know that this does not apply to you because Title II of the ADA only applies to state and local governments, and public institutions are considered a part of the state and local government. However, the Office for Civil Rights and the Department of Education has indicated that the goal would be to update 504 regulations to include this as well. Health and Human Services has updated their regulations for Section 504 for entities that are receiving federal funds from Health and Human Services to be consistent with Title II. So again, not an attorney, just listen to a lot of them. This is the time when you're a private institution that you want to talk with your general counsel about whether or not you are receiving funds from Health and Human Services and whether or not you are required to abide by the Title II regulations as well. So that's something to check with your attorneys later. The thing that I'm going to say is when they released this rule, I was really excited. And I was really excited because these are the best practices I have been talking about since 2009 when the Kindle cases first were publicized and we all started freaking out about this. A lot of the things that they're asking you to do are the things that I know I have been sharing with my colleagues. This is the way to do it because it is approaching it from the standpoint of what can you do to proactively ensure that your learning environment is inclusive and accessible and available to anyone who comes to it. So even if you're at a private institution, this is the time, if you haven't already, to start thinking about how you make this happen on your campuses too. Okay? All right. So I am not, number one, I am not the one to teach you about the WCAG guidelines. This is when my Robert Becker, for the other Robert Becker that was in the room, gets really worried when I start talking about POUR and the various components, because he's like, oh God, this is going to go down sideways really, really fast, because this is not my area of expertise. I am not the one who does the testing. But what I want to share with you about the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the entity, the international body that, develops and, publishes the WCAG standards, is that it is a international best practice standard. There is a lot of consultation that goes into the development of these, and they are widely, widely accepted. And so it has been something that we have been talking about in our field for years, that you want to be looking to WCAG in terms of what you're supposed to do here. So the standards of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are organized according to this acronym, because don't we all love acronyms in higher education? Like, it's like a universal thing, like make sure there's an acronym. And so it's the POUR acronym. And POUR stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And when you really start to look into it, it kind of makes sense. So the ability, perceivable, the ability to see, hear, or experience the information. Operable, you have to be able to use multiple forms of input and output to be able to, interact with the content. So I'm using the keyboard right now to advance the slides. I'm not using the mouse. That's a different input. And can you navigate through your websites by using keyboard, navigations? By the way, the only one that I know reliably, other than Control B or Control, V for making things bold or cutting and pasting, is Tab. And you can follow your cursor on the screen to see where your cursor is moving, and then you can hit Enter to select something. Beyond that, I'm not your girl. But can you use those multiple forms of input? That's what operable stands for. Understandable is meaning, are you checking for, the clarity of the language? Are there labels? So if you have a form, we were, talking in the back table before about a form that one of the institutions was using. Now, we didn't look at whether or not the form, the fields were labeled. I would suspect they weren't, based on what we saw of the color contrast. But does someone who's using a screen reader understand what each field is? Because the field has to have a label so that you know what you have to put into it. So that's where understandable comes in. And then robust is the one that I feel sometimes is a little bit more tricky to understand, but it is, to the broadest extent possible, learning outcomes are based on learning the topic and are tool agnostic, meaning however the student comes to, because we talk about students here, however the user comes to that content, they're able to move through it and get what they need, and it doesn't matter what tool they're using. So it's not designed to be used with JAWS if you're using a screen reader. It could be using NVDA, which is a free one. It should not matter what tool they're using to access it. Okay. Questions? No? Did I lose anybody? Okay. All right. Sure.
Hang on a second, John. Hang on.
Thank you for the clarification. I logged into ada.gov a while ago, and I read the two deadlines as meaning, well, we have an FTE of 4,500, so we get an extra year. You just clarified that for me. So I'm writing the CIO at my college to say, forget what I said.
Yeah, it's actually a common misunderstanding of how they wrote it. And when they first came out, I was actually at that summer, a couple of conferences, including the UPSIA DTL conference, and folks were presenting about it, and unfortunately, the presenter was saying that it was based on your FTE. And, when you have this expertise and you're not the presenter, it's always a sticky situation when you're sitting in the audience, correcting a presenter. But that was one where I said, listen, I don't mean to, question your authority, but I need to correct you on this one because I literally had just come from a session with attorneys who are employed by OCR and understood this really well. So but it's commonly out there that it's based on your FTE and it's not. Yeah, you're welcome. All right. So no conversation about law and regulation, I think, is complete without also talking about institutional policy. And I want to make sure that as we talk about policy this afternoon, that we're all really clear. Policy is an important tool, but it is only as good as you use it. Simply having the policy on the books is not going to help you if no one looks at it, if no one follows it, if no one's evaluating its effectiveness, if you're not having regular conversations about it. And so it's, this is one of those things where a lot of times I'll have conversations with colleagues who are like, I don't understand why this is such a problem for us still, Kelly. We have a digital content policy. Well, that's great. How did you communicate that it was there? Well, it went into, the minutes of the meeting where it was passed. Okay, but have you done any other conversation follow-up? Did you, set up meetings with your stakeholders so that they understood what the policy was and, what it meant for them? And did you have the folks who helped you craft that policy then take that, mantle of disseminating the information? Oh, I just wrote it by myself. Don't write policies by yourselves. Get a group of colleagues together. Make sure that you have a clear-cut change management plan and dissemination plan so that folks understand what your policy is and how it is designed to help you meet these requirements. And I can't emphasize that enough. So, but your policy, especially at an institution, signifies what your institution is committing to. It is kind of that guiding benchmark document that says, this is how we're going to do this. And this is why we're doing this in some instances, but this is how we're going to do this. And this is what we're going to do. That's what the policy is really important for. And that's why it's really important to have your stakeholder group help you develop that policy. It will also offer clarification because when something's, when you're not sure about the best way to proceed, look to your policy. And if your policy doesn't help you answer that question, well, now you've got your next revision that you can make. So policy is a really, really important tool. And we're going to talk a lot more about implementation and practice. So I'm going to save that for a little bit here. We're going to move on to the next one. So for those of you at Title II institutions, you have now been told what your benchmark standard is. Your benchmark standard is WCAG 2.1 AA. It's important to take a look, see what that entails. For those of you who are not at Title II covered schools, you still may have some choice in the matter in terms of what your benchmark standard is. But there's also parts of your institution where, as I mentioned earlier, I don't tell faculty that their content has to be WCAG 2.1 AA compliant. I break it down into different parts for them, and I give them different words, even though it kind of means the same thing, because I break it down in terms of what content they're sharing with students and what they need to do with it. So it's really important that your standard is one, again, same kind of thing as I said earlier about training, practical, relevant, timely, and then I'm going to add sustainable. Is that something that you can actually meet? Because there is nothing worse than putting in place, boxing yourself into the corner of a policy and a procedure that you cannot actually achieve. Because then it's worthless. It's, nobody's going to follow it. Okay. So who needs to be involved? We've talked about the stakeholders, and I'm actually, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk a lot more about stakeholders, throughout the afternoon. But also, how are you going to determine that it's the right plan? You also have to have a plan for evaluating the efficacy of what it is that you put in place. And we're going to talk more about that too. Okay. I love these commercials because they're so dumb. So if you can't see it, I've got the Twix, the right Twix and the left Twix. And the commercial, the intent of the commercial is that there's some massive difference between the two of them. I don't know. They eat the same to me. They taste the same to me. The only difference is sometimes one side of the package gets a little bit more smushed and squished, and the caramel gets stuck on the inside of the wrapper, and it's a little bit more work. So I feel better about eating the smushed one because of the fact that I had to probably burn more calories to get it out of the package. Otherwise, there's really no difference. But let's talk about the shift left. So the shift left is oh, hang on, before I keep forgetting where I put these, sorry. And I don't have it on this screen in front of me, so I've got to turn over there to make sure I don't forget what I actually wrote on the screen. Okay, another true or false. I gave you the answer to this one too, by the way, and this one's not a trick question. I should develop my content first and then worry about accessibility. False. Are we getting false online too?
Yep, all false.
Okay, awesome. Make sure you guys are still out hanging out there with me. It is false. It is so much easier, so much less expensive, and it takes considerably less time to build accessibility into your design as you design and not wait until something is already built. And we kind of, also liken it to, all of us have had the experience where you submit a paper, for a class, and you get back, either in my day, red ink all over it. Actually, I had one professor who used green, and I still hate green ink for that reason, because it was marked up with, notes all over the place, right? Nobody wants to see that all over their work. And, today's equivalent with, Microsoft Word are the comments and, and things everywhere. It's like, oh God, there's so many things I have to look at here. Well, that's how our developers and our engineers, feel when we give them back our review of what it is that they've done. And we want to, try to avoid that. So we want to take this concept of the shift left. And so what shifting left means is that you don't do this. So on the screen now, I've got an image of a colonial house, which, by the way, these don't exist in Arizona. This is what I miss about being here in New York, is these old homes, the Center Hall colonials. They're not all brown and desert colors. Like, it's beautiful, don't get me wrong, but I miss the variety. Flying into Rochester yesterday, I saw, the neighborhood, and I saw a pink house. I'm like, how cool is that? I've missed that. And then I saw all the white stuff on the ground, and I was like, oh, it's only because I love Alex that I'm here. But what you see in this image is this house, the Center Hall Colonial, has this big, ugly, functional, but ugly ramp attached to it. So what does it tell you? It tells you accessibility was an afterthought. Probably the person who bought the house. By the way, in case you don't know this, disability is the only protected class that you can join at a moment's notice, whether you want to or not. Back to life. It's the one that we can all belong to. And it tells me, and I see that we've got a hand up, so let me finish this slide and then we can go to the question online. It tells me that, the owner or someone who lives with the owner had an accident, now needs to use a wheelchair, and they had to figure out quickly how they were going to build accessibility into their home. And their solution was they put this ramp on. And usually the ramps look like this because you have to have it at a certain gradient so that you can actually get up the ramp without hurting yourself and falling. It's not integrated into the environment at all. It's maybe functional, but it's certainly not the best user experience. I know what it's like to walk up those ramps. I have done that before with a friend of mine who uses a wheelchair, and they're wobbly, and you're like, oh God, please don't fall. Don't collapse on me, right? So it's not necessarily the best user experience. It is more expensive to put this on than it would be if you were to build the ramp and the accessibility in as you designed the house and built the house in the first place, and it takes more time. So I can't see who the question is, but whoever had the question online, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, there was a question from Dean. It actually might have been the slide before. Dean, if you wanted to expand upon your question, asking about any references to the difference in costs.
Yeah, so you mentioned, and I think it's been standard wisdom along the way, that it is less expensive to build accessibility in from the start. Do we have, and I've always heard that, and seems logical, but are there actual comparisons out there that you can kind of point to or reference that actually kind of put that in such a way that, our college presidents and our VPs for finance will actually accept that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, from my perspective, the way that I've handled that, because I haven't seen any online, that kind of, go down and reference the cost breakdown. I can look to see if I find anything in some of the resources that I have. But what I've done as we've, advocated for that position at the University of Phoenix is I've talked about it in terms of project time. Because we work on a product model at the university. So, we have our 2-week sprints and, all of our designers, whether they're working on curriculum items or they're working on, our student and, faculty portals or the website, their time is carefully marked out with how much time each things are going to, the things are going to take. They, use t-shirt sizing and, whatnot. And so what we've done is we've said, okay, so let's think about how many staff had to be involved in this, and you spent how many hours doing this. We can go back through JIRA and see, how much the effort has been. And then we say, well, now you got to redo it again. So now it's going to cost you this many hours of staff time because all of this needs to be reworked. And then we add in my team's time to it too. So that's kind of how we've approached it at the University of Phoenix to try to get buy-in on that. But it's not perfect because, sometimes they want to see it as actual real dollars. We have seen it a couple times with, vendors where they'll say to us, okay, we can, that's going to be a customization and, it's going to, cost, this much. So we talk about that and talking about, kind of, we're trying to do some similar things on my team to try to get some of those metrics and, the real dollar costs, for our product teams and also for the executives as we're going through budgeting and whatnot. So I don't have a great answer to it, but that's been the way that I've approached it.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so whoops, I'm going the wrong way because I'm hitting the wrong button. Sorry, folks. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you bake accessibility in. So if you haven't had the chance, and this is on my bucket list, this is the Ed Roberts Center at the University of Berkeley, and Ed Roberts is one of the fathers of the disability rights movement, and this ramp is actually how you get from the first floor of the Ed Roberts Center up to the second floor. And so rather than being, stairs, which are functional but not accessible, they built this ramp, which actually, as you walk up it, you can see some other, parts of the exhibit. And it's really nice. It's built into the actual design and it's part of the aesthetic. So it's included. It is a better user experience. It's integrated. So those of us who can use the stairs don't have to go one access path. And then, somebody who needs to use a wheelchair or other mobility equipment has to go through a separate access path. Everybody can go up, the same path together. And it is, more efficient and cost effective because they didn't have to demo anything to put this in. Like I've had conversations, even as simple when I was at a different institution that will remain nameless, where we were designing new buildings and we were putting in computer labs for students. And I said, hey, as we're doing this, can we get some of those adjustable height tables and put those into the computer labs? And they're like, well, why would we do that? We don't have any students with a wheelchair, at those, or actually the way it was phrased to me is, well, why? Do we have wheelchair students? I'm like, okay, the wheelchair is the tool. So this is the one area where please don't use the phrasing wheelchair bound. Don't call them wheelchair people. Don't call them wheelchair students. Do not give the power to the chair and the tool. Keep the power with the person. The chair is the tool that gets them from point A to point B. It does not define the person. So you would say, do we have any wheelchair users at the institution? Well, that doesn't matter. We will have them at some point. Guarantee you. So, and if we did it now, while we're getting a deal on the other tables that we need, and we include a couple that have the adjustable heights, then we can be able to have them ready for when we need them. And by the way, they might actually be more usable by somebody who maybe wants to stand while they're at the computer desk, because it's actually better for you posture wise and getting, the blood flowing, and, it makes the environment more usable. I was moderately successful in that argument. But those are the kinds of things that you want to be thinking through. And so what does this mean in the online space? In the online space, it means looking at how can you make sure that your videos are being produced with the idea of producing captions and transcripts. Work from a script. If you work from a script as you're creating your video, you then don't have to use some sort of a speech recognition process to be able to get the actual text of what you said. You upload your script, you edit it, where you might have needed to, and then you'll also have the stage directions potentially so that it can help you from an audio description perspective as well. All right. Wow, that was really sensitive. Did I skip any other slides? Or did it just go right to Reese's? Okay. Scared me there for a minute. I was like, whoa, what's going on? I'm getting a little happy here. All right. You remember when Reese's peanut butter cups first came out? Who remembers those commercials? Like, seriously, who walks down the street with a jar of peanut butter? Like, I love peanut butter, but I can honestly tell you I've never done that. And so the commercial goes, the guy's walking with the peanut butter, the other guy's walking with the chocolate bar, they bump into each other. Remember those now? And oh my God, you got peanut butter in my on my chocolate, you got chocolate in my peanut butter. And then they taste it and they're like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. I have a child who's allergic to peanuts, and it was one of the saddest days of my life because I was like, she is not going to know the joy that is a Reese's peanut butter cup. She thinks peanut butter is disgusting. Well, it could kill her, so good reason, right? So she actually, she has seen me do this presentation before. She goes, Mom, you've got to stop using peanut butter cups. I'm like, Molly, listen, not everybody's allergic to peanut butter like you are. People really like this one. This is one that usually gets me some laughs. And she goes, okay, fine, mother. But you can't make the 21-year-old happy. So this is all about our campus collaborations. And Alex, I'm going to rely on you to kind of give me a signal when you think we need to kind of take a break, because I have no idea how long I'm talking. I'm just talking. Okay. Okay. So you guys will get a break from having to listen to me in a couple minutes here. So true or false? I gave you all of the answers to these, by the way, because I already said this. Access is an institutional responsibility, and everyone has a role to play in removing barriers. It is true. That one's not a trick question either. So the law and the regulations do require that you have appointees on your campuses for certain roles, right? One of my roles at the University of Phoenix is I'm the Section 504 coordinator, which means that I am responsible for ensuring that we are in compliance with Section 504. Does not mean I do all the work by myself. It means that I, have to make sure that we're meeting those obligations. The law doesn't always tell us who does what, when, and how. Sometimes it'd be easier if it did, right? Like, my life would be so much easier if I didn't always have to be nice to people and try to get them to do what I want them to do by trying to convince them that it's the right way. Going back to, I think, your name was Dean, your question about, the money and convincing the executives, right? It'd be so much easier if I could just go and put, the law on their desk. And so it says it, we have to do it. Instead, I have to rely on my charm, my sarcasm, and my humor to try to get them to do what I want to do. But there are lots of things here. As I mentioned earlier, if you send an email to a student, that is digital content, and it should be accessible. And so sometimes folks don't think about it that way. They think, well, everything that I put into my learning management system, I do my best to make sure it's accessible. I do the Microsoft Office accessibility checkers. I run it through Ally if we have Ally. I do this, I do that. But if you send an email to a student and you don't make a hyperlink descriptive, that's not going to be a great accessible user experience for that student if they're blind. So we want to be thinking about all of those things. There are lots of quick and easy ways to do this, and we're going to walk through some of these. So I'm going to go through a couple more slides, and then we'll take a quick break so that you guys can stretch your legs, and our online folks can get candy if they haven't already wandered away from their screens. But let's talk about your stakeholders. So one of the things that when I've done this presentation before, folks have said to me, are you going to give us a template? Are you going to give us a checklist? And my answer to that always is no. And the reason it's no, it's not because I don't want to be nice to you. I mean, I gave you guys in the room candy. I like being nice. But the reason is that there are too many variables that influence how you need to do this on your campus. And I don't know your institutional context. What works for me at the University of Phoenix, what worked for me when I was at Empire State College, which I don't, what do they call it? Michelle's not in the room, but whatever they're calling themselves now, I know it's different. University, that's what I thought. it will always be ESC to me. But, you know, what I did when I was at the College of St. Rose in Albany, all of those things had to be different because the institutional context was different. And your institutional context can vary from year to year. What I was doing at Empire my last year there was very different than my first year there, right? Because the environment within which we were working, the players had changed. We had new leadership, and new leadership comes new goals, new objectives, new stresses, new challenges. And we had a lot of changes in leadership while I was there. So that happened a lot. Same thing at the University of Phoenix. I came in the aftermath of an OCR investigation and resolution agreement. That's what created my position at Phoenix. And that context that I had to come in and work in was very different than what I'm doing now. And it had your strategy and your stakeholders, all of those pieces are going to evolve as the institution evolves. Okay, so there is a difference, and this is a concept that I want to make sure that everybody understands. There is a difference between something being legally accessible and functionally accessible. Legal accessibility means, especially for those of you at SUNY institutions, by April of 2026, that you meet the WCAG 2.1 AA guidelines. That's going to be legally accessible for you. Functionally accessible means that every student has the right accommodation strategy for them, and that it takes into account their individual differences. One big thing that comes into play here, and I don't have slides on it, but I'll just, other than this bullet point, students with disabilities, a lot of them are going to be using assistive technology. Students who are born blind are typically going to be expert users of that AT. Have you ever had the experience of sitting next to a student who's been blind since birth and been using screen readers since they were itty bitty? What that sounds like? It's like Micro Machine commercial guy. And I'm like, I talk fast. I can usually keep up with people who talk fast. I cannot keep up, you know, and understand what's being said. And it amazes me that the students have trained themselves to be able to do this. And then I have students at the University of Phoenix who most of them have acquired their disability after their last formal schooling and have never done accommodations before and are still learning the assistive technology. And so the assistive technology is not always the right and only strategy for that student because it actually doesn't offer them access, because it's not giving them any usable benefit because they're still learning it. And there's a huge learning curve that goes along with that. So that's something to keep in mind. We're going to talk a lot in a couple minutes about evaluating your tools and content. We're also going, to talk a lot throughout the rest of the afternoon about the difference between accommodations and accessibility. And I, just kind of alluded to that. It's a difference in accommodation is an individual strategy. It's what you have to do to ensure that that student has access versus accessibility, which is that the majority of your disabled students will have access. And then also, where do you have to have those partnerships? So some of you may be on campuses where you have a disability services office, but they are not the experts in accessibility. The accessibility expertise might be in your IT department. You might have a separate office. I have both at the University of Phoenix. I have a digital accessibility team that are my accessibility experts, and I have our student accommodations team, which is my disability services folks. And so they both report up to me, but it means that they are going to come at those conversations with a very different lens. A lot of our campuses likely have one person who's trying to do it all. I've lived that life. That's not fun, but that's likely what you're dealing with. But it's important to partner with them because I think someone said it earlier, and I can't remember what context it might have been. We were talking about it at one of the side conversations, but if the only person talking about accessibility on your campus is the disability services folks, you are not going to get widespread buy-in. They see us coming. And I make that joke all the time, and I'm like, oh, yep, here comes the redhead. We know what she's going to say. And they tune me out before I even get a chance to start. So if I have a faculty member though, or if I have the director of curriculum and instructional design talking about it, if I have the CIO talking about it, guess what? People listen. and they hear things differently. So it's really important to build your coalition. And that's what we're going to talk about. So let's talk about this. At your institutions, I have a list up here of, different, groups that need to be involved in helping you set policy, evaluate your policy, decide what your processes are going to be. And that, should include your procurement folks. They are probably my number one contact at the University of Phoenix. They're meaner than I am. I love it when I, get an email from one of the ladies' names is Kim, and Kim will be like, all right, I already told them, but I don't have the same title that you are. I was mean. You can come in and be nice and tell it to them, and they'll probably listen to you. And I'm like, oh, I love that. Okay, cool. Thanks, Kim. But it's really important, that they're hearing it from your procurement folks, because sometimes your procurement folks will work against you without realizing it, because they're like, oh, we got to go get accessibility involved in this. Well, your vendors hear that. And guess what they're going to do? They're going to be more resistant to it. So having a good relationship with them is paramount. IT, marketing, web design, depending on where that sits in your organization, academics, student services, tech support, faculty support. For those of you in the audience here in the room and those of you online, what other groups on your campuses need to be part of these conversations for you? Students, love that. Yep.
We have a mention for the library in the chat and facilities.
Yep. Library and facilities are important as well. Yeah, absolutely. Especially here in New York, facilities, when you guys get snow and you got wheelchair users on campus, they were my best friends then. I need this building cleared first because this kid needs to get there from there. Yeah, I don't miss those days. Have I told you guys that I don't miss the snow? Just in case I missed it. All right. And I think, the call out in the room about your students are such an important ambassador for what it is that you do. I won't name names because Michelle's in the room now, but I had a faculty colleague at one of our regional centers when I was at Empire, and she would be a little resistant to some of the ideas, that we would, have both from an accommodation perspective and anything related to accessibility. And I had a rock star student who was blind, and she was phenomenal. Like, she was such an expert user of the assistive technology. She understood the frustrations, and didn't blame us for frustrations when things didn't quite work the way that they were supposed to. But she was incredibly proactive about meeting with all of her faculty at the beginning of every semester, every term, to say, this is what my needs are. This is what you're going to see in the letter from Kelly's office. And if you have any questions about it, please let me know. So it's about 2-3 weeks into one of our fall terms, and I get a call and I see this person's name pop up on my phone, and I'm like, oh God, she's working with this student. What's blowing up? And that's what I'm expecting. And I answer the phone, and we have, exchange pleasantries, and she goes, I have to tell you that I love and adore this student, and she's making me realize what a jerk I've been to you. How can I help you convince my colleagues not to be a pain in your ass? Pardon my French. And I was like, I love this conversation, because that one student in 2 or 3 conversations made a huge impact on this particular faculty member, because all of a sudden it became really real for her. It wasn't some abstract, oh, they're making us do this and jump through the hoops because, they're afraid of being sued or whatnot. She finally understood that this was a student who really needed Word documents to be structured using style guides instead of just bolding a heading. And she understood why. And it was never going to be that she would understand that from me telling her, because she knows I can see. But this student telling her was impactful. So your students are really important parts of your team. Okay, there is a Word document for this. I am going to call myself out and hold myself accountable. This is not what you do with charts and tables. No one repeat this mistake, because this is an image of this chart, and you cannot make this accessible. Your alt text should not be that long. Just make the stupid table. So But the reason I have this here, and why you'll have the Word document version of this when we upload the materials, is because this is one of the exercises that I did for the University of Phoenix. And it has our roles across the top, and then it has some call outs about what it is that folks need to do. So when you're looking at this, what you're going to see is there are certain things that our accessibility team has as responsibilities versus our instructional design group. So our instructional design group, because we have a centralized design, practice at the University of Phoenix, we work from master course templates. So they have to design all of the courses. And so we have to consult with them, but they have to be able to do the design work and build it in and make it accessible from the get-go, because there is not enough bandwidth in the world for me to make all of those courses accessible. I think we have like 1,500 courses. We have over 80,000 students. I accommodate 15,000 students a year. So, our scale is not one that allows, for us to do that kind of work. So this is here for you to take a look at it and to use it as a guide to think through what are the roles on your campus and who do you need to have as new dance partners? I talk about that a lot. Like, we're used to in disability services, especially here in upstate New York, having conversations with facilities, like I mentioned earlier about snow removal. We were not as used to having conversations about IT, about web design, or marketing about web design. That wasn't in my wheelhouse. Like, I had to learn a whole bunch of new terms and then make sure that when I used them, I was actually using them correctly, because I don't know about all of you, but I'm one of those people who knows just enough about those words to be dangerous. But I'm hoping and praying that I'm using it in the right context and I don't get called out for using it in the wrong context. Luckily, I have colleagues who are pretty nice and correct me gently when I'm wrong. But so this is will be as part of the materials that you can take a look at this and then help to design this for your own campus. Okay, let's talk about faculty. How many of you in the room are faculty? Just a couple of you. How many of you in the room have taught? Oh, almost all of you. How about online? Oh, no, I'm sorry. I meant our online audience. You guys are getting good at that. Keep raising your hands. Do we have a sense of how many online?
We have a couple hand raised, myself, someone in the chat, so small amount.
Okay, awesome. So it is amazing to me. Dan and I were actually talking about this at lunch. At the University of Phoenix, we have very few full-time faculty positions, and they're staff positions. We don't have tenure at the University of Phoenix. Our faculty are adjunct faculty. There is a requirement that they work in their field because we want them to bring that practical experience to the classroom environment. That's one of the hallmarks of the University of Phoenix model. I was smart enough when I took the job 8 years ago to not think that I wasn't going to have some of the same conversations with faculty at the University of Phoenix that I did with faculty at Empire State College, now Empire State University or whatever. But I do. And the reason that I do is because there are certain parts of the role that transcend full-time tenure track status versus teaching adjunct faculty. And there's always going to be some frustrations with what they don't understand. And so the thing that is really important to keep in mind is how important the faculty member is to your team. Faculty a lot of times accuse us in accommodations of not caring about them. And I try to correct that myth whenever I can. I know how important you are to the student. Therefore, you're important to me. But I also know that I need you to do certain things because it's our obligation under the law. And you actually have to listen to me. I hate to break it to you, but you have to listen to me. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier with the other example, they can be champions or they can be a major thorn in your side. And that's any person though, right? It's not just faculty. I can have the same thing with a web developer. I can have the same thing, with a vice president in our IT organization versus a vice president in our marketing organization. And the one thing that is always interesting to me, and I hear this even at the University of Phoenix where we don't have tenure, academic freedom versus accessibility. I'm seeing some heads nodding in the room. I'm betting that our Zoom participants have a similar experience. They think that academic freedom means that they can do whatever they want, whenever they want, and everyone else be damned. Some of them are not quite that callous, and they're trying. I call it the kind of the teenager grasping at straws to stay out of trouble thing. Like they're going to come up with every excuse under the sun of why it wasn't their fault, when it's just like, dude, you screwed up. Just say I screwed up. Let's move on. Like, all this arguing we're doing about why this happened, I don't care. Let's just admit we need to move on. And that's what happens when they start talking about academic freedom. But I will put money on this, and I will die on this hill. Every time that I have heard complaints that accessibility impinges on the academic freedom of faculty is usually because there is something happening in the institution that they don't like, and they feel like they're losing control. So my message has to be different then. And my message isn't coming in, but I told you to, so therefore you have to, because that's not going to get me anywhere. It's let's look at it together and see how we can make it accessible. Let me help you. What are you using this content for? What's the purpose of this? All of those things. Faculty governance. I don't have faculty governance at the University of Phoenix right now. Not going to lie. Breath of fresh air. Sometimes. Other times, faculty governance was a really, really important champion for what it is that we did. And it's all about building those relationships. And faculty governance, for I would say a good portion of your faculty, is usually a trusted source of information. And so I don't have that. I don't have that trusted source to be able to go to them and say, this is what we need to do. What's the best way for us to do this? I don't have a group that I can say I consulted, the faculty senate, and this is the feedback that I got. So, it does sometimes make my life a little bit more challenging that I don't have faculty governance. I would say it's about 50-50. But faculty governance is an important group. And it's important to include them as part of the conversation about the institutional response to the Title II regulations, and as an important part of your strategy. Stock their toolboxes. The slides that are coming up, which is where you guys are going to work with your devices a little bit if you want to, are some of the quick, easy, down and dirty ways that you can make content more accessible. Those are the things that we require our faculty to do. And so I'm going to go through those in a minute, but I stock their toolboxes. We have a required accessibility training that we host for our faculty every year. Yes, I did say required. I do pay them for it. We do have follow-up sessions, but the trainings and any of our professional development are very specific. So one year, it was all about creating videos. How do you create accessible videos for instructor presence? We want you to create more videos. We want them to be accessible. This is how you do it. So it was singularly focused on that topic. It was short, it was digestible. It was something that was, easy for them to grasp. They had, we actually did better than I am today. In terms of saying, let's do this, now go practice that. It's really hard to do that in a setting where you've got people in person and people on Zoom. So I apologize for that. But, it was something that we could do for them. And then, we gave them some opportunities for practice. And then we use the Microsoft Office and, Microsoft, tools. We have Viva Engage. And so Viva Engage is a really important, vibrant community for our faculty. And my team is in there all the time, posting tips. Did you know you can do this? We're going to do office hours on this. And, we're providing a lot of support to faculty. And we work with our faculty training and engagement team to make sure that the web resources are updated so that faculty have all of this information at their fingertips. They just need to go look for it, or they need to ask us for it. And we're going to, support them. So we stock their toolboxes. And then also, as I mentioned, the practical, the relevant, the timely. I cannot emphasize enough. I don't spend a lot of time telling faculty what the definition of accessibility is. They've already heard that from me. That's not practical for them at that moment in time. What they need to know is, I want you to make your PowerPoints accessible, and this is how you do it. Or, by the way, we have over 18,000 images on our Ally report this last month that don't have alt text. Faculty, I need you to put alt text on your images, and this is how you do it. And we try to anticipate what those questions are, and then we design the training around that. So that's really important. All right, let's 4:45. We'll take a break.
Take a break. Ooh, well, yeah, let's take a break. there's, I think, snacks out there. It's 4:45 right now.
Yep.
This goes until 5:45. So the hands-on piece is coming up then. So if we come back at 5,
Yep.
does that work?
Yep.
Does that work for everyone? So we'll take a quick break. Snacks, facilities, please come back because the hands-on part is going to come next. And then is dinner at 6:30. Okay. All right.
Awesome.
And for the folks online, who is moderating? Is it Jennifer?
It's
It's
me,
Elaine.
Megan. Well, yep, and then you've got Elaine moderating.
I don't know if you wanna, can you pause?
Time check, it's 5 o'clock. So we're gonna go ahead and get, started. Aline, can you confirm that you are back and are starting the recording?
I'm back. I believe Megan may have started the recording. Yes.
Yep,
Okay,
we're
thank
good.
you. Awesome. All right, folks. So I know this is late in the day. I know it's been a long day. And, I know it's hard to come back from a break. So I appreciate everybody being back. I mean, for those of you in the room, I hope you're still enjoying the candy that's on the table. If you don't have your preferred candy on your table, walk around and see if it's on another table. I'm totally fine with that. Those of you on the Zoom meeting, if you didn't get your own candy or type of sugar, put your AirPods in or whatever and go get something and come back. All right. But I am going to jump right in because I still have probably way more slides than I do time. And I don't want a motor machine guy talk this through. I want to make sure that you have time to think about this. So Three Musketeers, my very favorite candy bar in the whole wide world. I don't care who thinks it's boring or sorry excuse for a candy bar, as my team has told me. It is my favorite. I normally talk about Three Musketeers as the 3 things that accommodations don't do, which is reduce standards, accommodations don't fundamentally alter, and accommodations don't pose an undue burden. But now we're going to talk about 3 of my other favorite things, which is data. And by the way, data is your friend. Evaluation and communication. And so let's jump right into it and let's talk a little bit about leveraging data. Sometimes when you do this work, you get caught up in but it's the right thing to do. Well, guess what? It might be, but that is not going to sway your vice president over administration and finance who wants to tell you that dollars talk and BS walks, right? That's just you need to have the numbers to justify what it is that you're going to do. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what are some of the ways that we use data at the University of Phoenix and what I recommend that you do with that. It's really important that you can paint a picture if you are responsible or work with your disability services office to understand who your students are. And not just your student population as a whole. As I mentioned earlier, I work at the University of Phoenix. Our student is an adult student population. Our average age, I believe, is 36 or 37. They come from mostly underrepresented backgrounds. About 60% of my students are students of color, and 66, almost 2/3 of our students are women. And a good number of our women are actually single parents as well. And also most of them are first-time college students. We've had an effort underway because as our enrollment has been growing again, a lot of our students are coming to us without any significant prior college experience. There's a learning curve that goes into coming back to college as an adult student, and they all think that online learning's easy. And then they realize it's not. And they have to learn the modality while they're trying to learn the content. So it's important to understand who your students are. Now, when I throw the students with disabilities on top of that, the picture gets even a little bit fuzzier, right? About who our students with disabilities are. But the understanding who your students with disabilities are helps to drive your prioritization conversations as you're setting your strategy and as you're figuring out how you're going to comply with the Title II regs. So data helps you level set on expectations. It guides your resource allocation, which, by the way, is not a bad thing. I think some people in my field feel like we're being discriminatory when those of us in administration say, show me the numbers. I need to know what the numbers are. You have to report on those things. And it is not a violation of FERPA to tell your administration how many students with disabilities you have. That is not protected information. That's information you should be sharing not only willingly, but before you're asked for it, because it helps everyone to understand who your students are. And then the last bullet point is one that's really important. Your data is going to tell a compelling story. And you want to make sure that those who have either a preconceived notion of what disability is, they may not say it out loud, but there are people who think that students with disabilities don't belong in higher ed. And you are always having to fight up against that unstated question. Why are they here? Why are we doing this? I cannot tell you how many times in my first year at the University of Phoenix, I heard, Kelly, why are we prioritizing the needs of a few students against the needs of the many? And I'm like, we're not. I don't know why you think we are. We're not. Accessibility benefits everybody. And I had data to back it up. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What do we measure? I say this to my team all the time. Data is our friend, to the point that they parrot it back to me. I'm like, what do I always tell you? Data is our friend, because, you know, they'll sometimes get annoyed when we have, you know, audits and whatnot. And it's like, hey, you didn't mark this, you know, these things right. It's making it hard for me to report on that. They're like, we know data is our friend. We'll fix it. Like, it's important. It's really important. But what do we measure? How many students with disabilities we have? How many who have disclosed? So we have a referral system at the University of Phoenix. So I know how many students have disclosed to a member of the campus community, whether it's a faculty member or a staff. And I know the disclosure rate compared to the number of students who are using accommodations. That's really important information for my institution. I also know what the academic outcomes are for my accommodated students. I measure retention. I measure course pass rates. I know, you know, a little bit more about the credit levels that our students have when they come in as newly degreed students. And I know, you know, kind of what those experiences are. And I can also look at that because we have an amazing data team that pulls all of this into Power BI for us, that I can be able to slice it based on some accommodation statuses and see how it changes when students use accommodations. That is critical information for my institution. Your institutions, it might be something different. And so it's important to know, what are your administrators talking about? What questions are you being asked? How are you looking at resource allocation, and what's going to speak to them? We also use Anthology Ally at the University of Phoenix. Incredible tool. And I'm not an agent of Anthology and Blackboard. I know SUNY has a system-wide contract with D2L and Brightspace. You can integrate Ally into Brightspace as well. Yeah, you do have Ally too? I did not know that. Awesome. I'm glad to hear it. Ally is an amazing tool. And Ally is not just amazing for the service that it provides to the students with the alternative formats, but also you can look at the course by course. You can look at it at, you know, department level, however you have your Ally report configured, to look at what content is being downloaded into alternative formats. So if I have a piece of content that's being downloaded a lot as an audio file, guess what I'm going to share with my instructional designers? Hey, students are choosing to use this as an audio file more, than they are choosing to use it as a written piece of content. Maybe we need to think about in the next course revision, looking at that and creating a podcast or an audio or a video that goes with this content, because that's what students seem to be choosing. And I know that with the usage numbers, that it's way more students without accommodations who are doing that than the students with accommodations, because I can see the numbers. So those are really important. And then also because I have a digital accessibility team, we measure the amount of work that they have and how. So going back to the question, I believe that was Dean who asked earlier about being able to quantify what the work is when you don't build accessibility into the design and your build of the tool or the product. I can quantify the number of hours that my team worked on something because it needed to be remediated. Okay. Sharing your story. I cannot emphasize this enough. Do not wait to be asked. If you have data about your program and it includes students with disabilities or accessibility metrics, start putting it out there. When you get your colleagues used to hearing about it, it provides an entry point to the conversation. So we do a quarterly meeting with all of our leadership, all of our deans, the entire cabinet, our executive leadership team is invited to these meetings, as well as other stakeholders across the university. They come or they don't, I don't care. I don't keep attendance, but I record them. And my team provides an update. And I have 3 separate teams. So I have our student accommodations team that talks about what we're working on in terms of accommodated students, and we report out on our data about accommodated students. I have our digital accessibility team, which is usually sharing wins about how product teams and IT and marketing have integrated accessibility into their work. So we're giving them some, some kudos, and everybody loves kudos. My university, they're motivated. We use BetterWorks for performance tracking, and you can do kudos through BetterWorks. They love that stuff. Like I could not care less if you put in a BetterWorks thing for me. Like I appreciate when people say thank you, or they say, oh, that was a great job, Kelly. That's all I need. But when people put it in for people, for employees where that's motivating, their supervisor sees it, their leader sees it, and it means something to them. And it's really, really important. So we leverage that tool, quite a bit. And then my educational equity team will also offer updates on their activities. And because our students are majority minority, it's important for us to ensure that folks understand what coming from those different educational backgrounds and those different lived experiences means for the student's ability to be successful. And we have decades and decades of research in higher education that shows when students feel connected to their universities, they are more likely to persist and to retain and to get to graduation. So we want them to feel connection to the university. So we offer a lot of service and support and indirect support to our students by virtue of sharing that information with our leaders and making sure that it trickles down to their teams. So it's really important, but also it's important to brag about your successes. Highlight accessibility wins. I know most of you are not in the role that I'm in, but if you are working on a course and you and your colleagues are able to, include a piece of content that, was out of the box accessible and you had good student experiences with it, brag about it. Because people at your campuses are so used to hearing accessibility in the negative. We want to change that. We want them to be thinking about it as being a competitive advantage because accessibility does offer benefits to students other than those with disabilities. Okay. This is an example. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but this is an example of data that we share with the Board of Trustees. I report directly to our provost, who is on our executive leadership team. And we are the ones who do the report for the Student Learning Committee of the Board of Trustees. And so the board doesn't come in and ask for information about what we're doing for accommodated students. I just tell them. So this is a slide that I put together for our board at our September meeting, which was the end of our academic year. Our academic year is run until August 31st. They have information here about what our averages were for the last course grade by our accommodated students and how it changes from those students who are using accommodations to those students who have disclosed but are not using accommodations. Because again, remember, our system allows me to see that because we require folks to put in referrals when the student has disclosed. And if the student doesn't pursue accommodations, which is their right, I now have a data point. And so I use it liberally and we summarize that information. So I'm able to show them these are the successes that we have. We know students are doing better when they are using accommodations than compared to those students who are disclosing but not using accommodations. And oh, by the way, I can use that information with students too, to try to get them to request accommodations when they disclose their disabilities. So that's really important. Evaluating effectiveness. So we work really closely with our curriculum teams, and this is a really important part of our strategy. We want to look at so there's 3 levels of review that we do. So let me back up here for a second. The first level of review that we do is when we are procuring content and developing our courses. So we have the WCAG standards. We look at things, make sure that it's accessible going into that course. We use Ally as a check to make sure that everything meets the accessibility scores that we have said we want to be at. And then the next step of that is when we have a student who has a significant accessibility needs, usually a student with a sensory diagnosis, we will go in and do a review of that course when the student is enrolled to take it. So there's some work that the accessibility team, does with our student accommodations office to make sure that we know that. And we go through and we say, okay, this content's going to work. This one's not going to work. We need to come up with an alternative here. This is our accommodation path. And then once that course is done, we do a postmortem. That's probably not a great phrase, but you know what I mean when I say a postmortem, right? So let's not get, gruesome about it, but, we want to look at, did it work well? One of the things that we did, in the last 2 years was we have a separate Teams channel with that talks about all of the alternatives and different access needs. And each college has its own separate page and channel. And we have regular communications with the leadership of the colleges so that we can report back, they can report back, and we can make improvements. That's a really important part of evaluating our effectiveness, because then it gives us a roadmap for the next time. Oops, I hit something. Hang on. Sorry about that. So we also get feedback from our students and our faculty. Every student and faculty get end of course surveys, and so while we don't specifically ask questions about accessibility and accommodations, it comes up. So we'll take that information. I mentioned to you earlier that we do a required accessibility training every year. I use the quiz that's part of that training to ask them for feedback. They have to complete the quiz so that we can record that they actually did it. So it's a sneaky way for me to get 100% compliance on a survey. I do use it judiciously though, because I don't want to hear any, will you stop doing this, redhead? We're on to you. And I haven't had that yet. And then also, we do regular audits. Our courses are revised on a course, revision cadence. We're part of those conversations, so we do take a look at those. We have, with some of our bigger vendors, we do have quarterly meetings with them. So like every quarter, I'm meeting with the accessibility folks from Anthology. I also have it set up with McGraw-Hill. So our bigger vendors, who are providing us with a lot of materials, we're talking to them regularly because I need to see what their roadmaps are. I need to see what their releases are, and then we need to be able to give them feedback. And, that has worked really well for us. Of course, that's my scale. So adjust that to think about what your institutional context is and how you need to be part of those conversations. And we're not shy about sharing feedback with them. So if we have, a new release, so like Blackboard release is like every 2 weeks, we will periodically go through and say, okay, this feature is something that could be potentially difficult if it doesn't work the way we expect it to. We know Anthology's accessibility team looked at it. We're going to double check their work. And we're going to go in and we're going to take a look at it. And if we find any discrepancies, we will go to the accessibility team and say, hey, this didn't work the way you thought it would. Your VPAT said it would do this, or your release notes said it would do this. This is what it's doing with this screen reader under these circumstances. And it's really important that we have that communication because of the scale of which we do things. Okay, back to basics. M&Ms, they melt in your mouth, not in your hand, right? I don't know. Sometimes my hands, if it's hot in Arizona, it still gets colored. Weird. Anyways, they usually don't actually last in my hand that long, but sometimes you never know. I might have taken too big a handful. All right. So what do we ask everyone to do? We ask everyone to post accessible PDFs, including our faculty. We ask them to post caption videos with transcripts. We ask them to make sure that every audio file has a transcript, that they post descriptive hyperlinks, that all of our images have alternative text descriptions. And I already told you that I still have 18,000 images that don't have alt text. So we're still working on that one a little bit. And then also we asked them to take a look at color contrast. So I have some slides.
How do you know that? How do you know that 18,000 images don't have all that?
Ally. Okay. We know that because of Ally. So when I go into the institutional report on Ally, it gives me a breakdown of what content meets what accessibility level, and I can look and see the file types, and it tells me how many have accessibility issues. So 18,000 in a month, that just tells me they're using the same thing over and over again and not doing anything with it. We're working on it. Okay. Oh, we have a hand up.
Yeah, there was just a question in the chat. How do you get accessible PDFs? That is the biggest challenge for us, coming from Stephen.
100%. Stay tuned, Stephen. We're getting there. I've got a slide on it. Okay, how do we evaluate our tools and content? So we do use accessibility conformance reports. Remember what I said earlier, your accessibility conformance report, or ACR, is actually the completed VPAT, and VPAT stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. So if you have, folks saying, here's my ACR, that's actually what you want. You want that VPAT. Now, with that said, some VPATs ACR reports are not worth the paper they're printed on. There's a lot of variability in how folks fill those out. And I could do a whole 3-hour workshop on evaluating those. So we're not going to do that today, but just know that that's something you want to pay attention to. I have been very involved with One Ed Tech, and I have chaired the accessibility task force for One Ed Tech, where we developed the accessibility rubric. I have a couple slides on the rubric that very selfishly I'm going to plug and help you to take a look at that. If you are, I'm not sure, I don't believe SUNY has a system-wide contract with membership with One Ed Tech anymore. You might have it at the campus level. If you're not sure, Google One Ed Tech, look at their member directory. It'll tell you whether or not you are a member of One Ed Tech. And so if you have questions about that, you can contact me offline, but I'm not going to spend any more time talking about that part until I get to the rubric. But we also want to look at keyboard navigation. I mentioned to you earlier, being able to do certain things with the keyboard using your tab. That's a real quick text, for you to look at and to see where your cursor is. Is it moving where you expect it to? Resizing. So if you magnify something, what happens to it? You want it to resize depending on the size of the screen that you have. That's an accessibility feature that, oh, by the way, helps you on mobile. And that's another reason why, we advocate for doing these things. Color contrast, there is a color contrast checker that I'm going to share with you in a second. Compatibility with screen readers. Most of you are likely not going to be testing for compatibility with screen readers. That's a pretty sophisticated test, but just know that that is something that we ask our vendors. We do not ask them if they are ADA compliant. Please don't use that vernacular. Even after the Title II regs come into being, ask them if their tools are compatible with screen readers and what sort of accessibility testing do they do. Because your account representatives are always going to tell you that they comply with the ADA because they don't know any different. They don't know that there really isn't anything for them to do up until April of 2026. What testing are they doing for accessibility? That's an important question that I always ask in exhibit halls. It depends on how ornery I'm feeling, how much fun I have in exhibit halls. Sometimes I go in with the idea of, let's see how many people I can educate today. And I will ask questions like, are you ADA compliant? Actually, I usually say, are you accessible? And I hear the ADA compliant, but what I really want to know is what their testing protocol is, how they're doing that. And then do you have any faculty, staff, or students who happen to be native users of assistive technology who might be willing to help you test things? We have found a lot of things that way because we do have, folks within our population who are using screen readers as part of their everyday life. And, they see things or experience things rather when they're using the screen reader that my testers who are expert testers don't pick up on because they actually can rely on their senses. Okay. This QR code is going to take you to the page that has the information about the One Ed Tech accessibility rubric. I am not going to spend a ton of time on this. The slide deck will be available to you later if you don't get this. There's also a link that explains the task force. The task force was comprised of One Ed Tech members who are both institutional members, K through 12 members, as well as members from the vendor community. And I'm not seeing a ton of people still looking for the QR code, so I'm going to advance the slide because I want to tell you, yep. Well, that's great. All right, I will get it. I will get a better link and make sure that you have the link to the page because that should have been the public one. So my apologies for that. If you are on our Zoom meeting, I've just been informed that it is a forbidden link and you can't actually access it. So I'll make sure that gets updated and get that so we can share that with the resources. But the things that I want you to know about the accessibility rubric, the rubric is not something that's going to replace an accessibility evaluation. It's not going to be a replacement for the WCAG standards. What it's going to do is to help you fill in some of the information. So the categories are information and documentation. So we want to know how the vendor has approached, developing the tool and what information they share. So for instance, one of the things is our clients can actually get a copy of our accessibility roadmap. We want to know that. That's an important part of your evaluation. Two, what the procurement process and communication looks like. Are they doing demos, or are they expecting, the institution and the potential client to be the one, looking at the accessibility features? The accessibility and conformance, we want to know what has been built in. So one of the questions here is, what sort of testing are you doing? And also alternatives and accommodations. So in my role, as I oversee both accommodations and accessibility, I know that there are times that this tool is not going to work for every student. I want to know if this vendor is going to be willing to work with me to come up with an alternative accommodation or an alternative assignment if I need it. So those are the types of questions that you see. This is really based more on an accessibility maturity model than it is necessarily a straight accessibility evaluation. But I'll be around until tomorrow afternoon if you have questions about this One Ed Tech. And if you Google One Ed Tech accessibility rubric while you're playing on your devices now, you might be able to find it without having to wait for me to get you the link. All right. I'm going to skip this slide quickly just because I want to get to the rest of the slides on, some of these, key accessibility things. And this is just a rundown of some of the tools that are available. And you all have access to Ally through SUNY, which is phenomenal. It's a really awesome tool. But the one thing, oh, why does it look like that? Oops. All right, that looks terrible. Sorry, guys. That did not look like that on my slide. Anyways, all right. So let me walk you through this. These are the things we ask our faculty to do. These are the accessibility requirements. These are the benchmark standards for faculty. The first one is descriptive hyperlink. Who knows what a descriptive hyperlink is? Okay. Is click here an appropriate descriptive hyperlink? No. I'm hoping all of you on the Zoom are shaking your heads as wildly as it was in the room here. It is not. This is the time when I ask you to raise your right hand and repeat after me. I promise that I will never, ever use click here as a hyperlink in any form of content. Okay, you've all been properly deputized as descriptive hyperlink police. Okay. Given that it's 5:27 and I have 18 minutes left and I planned way too much content and talked a little bit too much, I was going to have you all kind of work in your small groups to kind of come up with some ideas about how you do descriptive hyperlinks. You're going to need to do that on your own because I want to get through the slides. Okay. I've got some examples here for you on this slide when you get it, and I will fix it in terms of that. Embedded on each of these slides are also some disability awareness resources that I love. Stella Young is one of my very favorite TED Talks. And if you have not had the opportunity to watch it, it is well worth the time. She's hilarious. And her story is really important. So take a look at those. Ah, that's why it looks like that. I forgot that I had animations on this. Okay, so I am not failing the color contrast test. All right. If you do not know why descriptive hyperlinks are important, here's the elevator pitch for why they're important. When you use a screen reader, you can skip by link. Guess what happens when click here is your link? And you have 3 of them on the page. This is what your screen reader user hears. Click here, click here, click here. Which click here did you want? Can you tell? You can't. So that's why it's really important to make your descriptive hyperlinks your keywords that tell the person, if they're just listening to it, where they're going to go. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on. Color contrast. This is an example that freaked Kelly out, where the text is, grayed out on the other side and is not good color contrast. So color contrast is basically exactly what you think it is. The difference between the background color and the foreground color. Usually you see it between the background of your PowerPoint, your website, your form, and then whatever color the text is being used. There is a color contrast checker. You just need the hex code to put that in through WebAIM, and it will tell you whether or not it meets color contrast. But if this slide were formatted this way with this dark blue text that you can see on the other side of the screen before I hit the next button, that doesn't work for people with disabilities, but it also doesn't work for all of you in the room, does it? And there's a good number of us who probably would not say that we had a disability. So it's a basic usability that's going to make everything better for everyone. So it's, varying light environments too. It's, sometimes when you're working on your computer, it's going to look great. And then you put it up on something like this and it looks terrible. And that's again, where you don't want to necessarily just trust your eyesight as you're evaluating it, because when you're presenting it, it's going to look different. All right. Accessible documents in Microsoft Office. I have to give Microsoft credit here. They have done a lot of work to beef up the accessibility of their documents, and especially with the accessibility checker. It is actually fairly reliable and fairly accurate in looking at the issues that you will have in the different types of documents that you can have. So what are the most common document types that you're seeing on your campus? I'm hearing PowerPoint. I heard PDFs. We're going to hold PDFs for a second. Word documents, right? So one of the basic things that, and my rule always is keep it as simple as you can. Use the templates and the built-in guides, especially for PowerPoint, because PowerPoint, a screen reader does not read what you see right now. Does anybody know what PowerPoint reads? PowerPoint reads the outline. Did y'all even know that there was an outline? Oh yeah, there's an outline. And you can switch your view to see the outline. And what happens when you just take a blank slide and then you start adding text fields and whatnot to it, it's not going to appear on your outline. And so that's one, you want to understand how the tool works so that you know that when it doesn't matter as much if I used a blank slide and just added, text box when I'm presenting it like this. No, but is it going to screw you up if you use assistive technology and I send you a copy of this document afterwards? Yeah, you're not going to have access to it because the screen reader is only reading from the outline. This is essentially a picture. So the other piece that I want to make sure, and you probably all know this because you're all super smart and you got gold stars for me earlier today, and you have candy on your tables, and we've been talking about this stuff for a while, right? When you're working with Microsoft Word, and I mentioned this earlier, and I'm sure, I'm willing to bet that each of you have faculty at your institution who does this, and they just bold the heading instead of actually using the style guide. What's really important about using the style guide is it introduces navigation into the document. And when you introduce navigation into the document, somebody who's using a screen reader can navigate by those headings. And they can, switch their experience, their interface with the screen reader so that they can jump to whichever heading that they want. And so that's usually one of the ways that I convince faculty. Anything else about it kind of sometimes goes over their head a little bit, and they get that look of, oh my gosh, she's talking too much about stuff I don't want to understand. So we try to keep it simple, and that's one of the ways to keep it simple. Okay, PDFs. I'm going to try to tell you in 2 minutes. Just kidding. We do full hour-long, morning-long workshops. I'm making PDFs accessible. So a PDF, as you all know, that you need to convince your faculty can be formatted in many different ways. Some good, some not so good. Most often it's because they had a Word document and they don't want someone to modify the Word document, so they choose to print it as a PDF. Those are not going to be accessible. You want to save it as a PDF from Microsoft Word or Office products. When you save it as a PDF, it does bring over some of the navigation that you had from doing your Word document appropriately with your style guides. Okay. If you have a scanned document, how many of you still have faculty using articles from 1982 and they're still using them? Of course you do, because we like what we like and we don't like to change. Those are going to be really difficult to make accessible. There are tools out on the market today that you can be able to contract with. There's a company called Equidox. We actually contract with them because my marketing team loves to do fancy things with their PDFs and build in a whole bunch of different stuff that makes it really difficult for us to remediate it. And then there's also a tool called Census Access. We've also contracted with them over the years. There is, different, optical character recognition. Sometimes it's going to be really difficult to be able to get to the PDF to make it accessible from the format that it's in. And then you got to look at, okay, are we sending it out? Are we trying to do it in-house? What are we going to do? But they can be notoriously difficult, and I get that. And the more complicated that they are, especially with some of the PDFs that marketing might be developing, the more it's important to have those conversations early as part of the design phase. So I'm gonna pause here for a second. There's a really good resource, WebAIM, which is Web Accessibility in Mind. They have some phenomenal resources, and I've got them linked on multiple of these slides here that go way more into more depth than I can. One quick thing that I was going to have you all try was to pull up a PDF on your computer and to see if it has any basic accessibility. This is not a comprehensive test. You try to highlight any of the text on the screen. If you highlight the text on the screen, then at least you know that there is some recognized text on the document, and then you can move on to other things like checking for reading order and headings and whatnot. My very favorite is when, it's a 2-column document and it just reads across the page, and then it's like, oh God, those ones are a bear to try to navigate through. So any specific questions about PDFs? I'm going to be 100% honest that I am not an expert in how to remediate them all. And if you have really complicated questions, I may have a member of my team, but I can see John's hand is up in the back. And Aline, if there's anybody online, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand.
Hi. Yeah, one of our biggest problems are mitigating issues with PDFs that come to us from JSTOR or from the publisher or whatever. And we are making some progress with that. But my question is, in a lot of these articles, especially from somewhere like JSTOR,
Yeah.
it starts with maybe a topic line at the top and then the title underneath it and then the author's name.
Yep.
And most of the time, those PDFs just figure the first line must be heading 1.
Right.
Is there a reason that the first thing on the page has to be H1 no matter what it is?
So there's different schools of thought on that. So you're going to get the Kelly Hermann version of what I think, which, some people may agree with and others may not. So I'm just going to put that caveat out there. I look at the other information that is on that page and whether or not it is salient to the purpose for which the student would be reading that article. And I will make my decision that way in terms of what's H1. Would that necessarily pass an accessibility checker? No. And why? Because those are built on AI models that tell it the first thing needs to be the H1, right? And I have, some folks within our marketing team who don't like the way H1 looks, so then they start with H2, and I'm like, well, that's going to confuse, the screen reader. Don't do that. Change the style of your H1. You can actually do that, and they're like, oh, you can? It's like amazing what people don't understand how to work with the tools that they have. So my advice there, John, would be take a look at what that content is. And if it is significant and salient to the actual content of the article, make that the H1. And if it is not, you can put that information. I mean, I've done it where I put it in a header or a footer, depending on what it is. All right, go ahead, Aline.
There's a question from Danny. When exporting from Google, is EPUB better than PDF?
So it depends on the technology that the student has to consume it. EPUB is going to have to be, used with an e-reader, that can consume EPUB content. If your student has, assistive technology and they're using something like Kurzweil, or if they have a Kindle or, so it really is going to depend on the user. EPUB could be preferable to a PDF just because it has some of the native features built into it and it will be, better for that particular device. So it really is going to depend on the end user and what they're using. All right. Okay. If you have other questions, I'm sure, too, if there are questions that are coming up in the Zoom chat, if there are things that we don't get to, Alex, I'll just tell you ahead of time, I'm happy to get the transcript of the questions and I can answer those offline. All right, alt text. This is the other thing that I was going to have you all do. Alt text is the description of what you see in the image. And my statement used to be, the computer can't tell what's in the image. Well, now with AI, it can tell sometimes what's in the image, but it's not always good at it. You guys remember when YouTube was first a thing with the auto captions? Like that was really fun. Those were fun videos to watch with the captions. There's actually a video that my team uses, and I forgot to get the link from her. You know, where somebody made a song of all the caption fails, and it's hilarious. But the same thing is happening now with the AI captions. And the other thing that the AI captions doesn't take into consideration is the context for which you are using the image. So I've used an image before of my two younger kids when we were at Disney. And they were both, you know, sharing a double stroller. They were 4 and 2 at the time. And my son is pulling on his ear. So depending on what I'm using that image for, it could be a travel and hospitality course where I'm going to want to talk more about the double stroller and, you know, the way that we're interacting at the park, because that's what's significant potentially to my course content. Compare that with if it's a course on basic hearing and audiology, like I would have taken as a speech therapy major. The tugging on the ear is the most important part, because guess what? That kid had a raging ear infection and was absolutely miserable at SeaWorld because we didn't realize he had a raging ear infection, and I missed it until years later I was looking at that photo. So your alt text will vary depending on the context within which you are using that image. And the other thing that you want to keep in mind when you're looking at alt text for your image is not just, like I said, the context, but is it significant to the content? And you don't just make something decorative because then you don't have to write something in the box. All right, come on, I know, right? We're all guilty of it. I've done it. I'm like, oh, that image isn't that important. And then your alt text description should be like a Twitter post or whatever the heck they call that now. But it should be shorter in characters. Your alt text description should not be several paragraphs long, because no one wants to listen to that. And if that's what you're using that image for, you need to embed that information into the text in a different way so that all individuals are benefiting from it. The reason you do alt text is to look at what that image is adding to the document and to the content and what you want your user to take away from it. Okay? So for a fun game at home, pull out some pictures and start writing alt text. It's really, we make it more complicated than it needs to be, but it is a skill that you want to work out. So, all right, video accessibility. Did I see a hand up go up? Yep. Hang on for the mic, please.
There you go, Donna. Thanks. I just worked with a publisher through McGraw-Hill, and it was for an accounting course. And I was looking at their images and PowerPoints. And she said that they were all being generated, the alt text was being generated by AI.
Yeah.
And I told her, I said, these are not really accessible.
Yeah.
They're not describing what's in these images.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I just wanted everybody else that's working with their faculty to know that.
Yeah, it drives me crazy, actually. And I have said to publishers repeatedly in the 20 whatever years I've been doing this, why don't you have your authors write your alt text for you? And they're like, really? That's like a crazy idea. I'm like, they're the ones who are helping you with the content. They know it. They're your SME. Like, have them write it. So I think that that's a huge problem, you know, with the publisher content, because they are relying too much on the AI because, you know, they're trying to keep with timelines and workflow and everything, and it winds up not being accurate. So yeah, I know, I agree with you. And I think we all need to be giving them that message, because let me tell you what happens. I will sit down and meet with them, and you know what I'll hear? Kelly, University of Phoenix is the only one asking me for this. And I'm like, no, we're not. And now I'll say, I was just in a room with, you know, 50 other people where we all were saying the same thing. Like, I'm not the only one asking you for this. And even if I am the only one asking you for this, let me tell you what will happen if you start doing it. I'm going to tell my colleagues that you're doing it, and it's going to be good word of mouth for you. And word of mouth spreads like wildfire through this community. And if you make our lives easier, we're going to talk to our academic colleagues and try to sway some of their decisions too, because you made my life easier. Like, let's think about this here for a second. All right, videos. We talk about videos a lot. I feel like, everybody probably knows what's here, but your video should have captions and transcripts. It's not an either or. Videos need to have captions and transcripts. And just a quick note about captions. Oh my gosh, I have 1 minute. Holy cow, time flies. And I'm talking fast too. But anyways, your captions need to be grammatically accurate. It is a form of communication, and there is a title in the ADA. We always talk about Title I, Title II, and Title III. I can't remember if it's 4 or 5, but it's one of them, is about effective communication. And that means that your captions need to be accurate. That's why YouTube auto captions were not effective, because they were not accurate. So that is something that you want to keep in mind. And also the transcript is important because it does give the student a way to get the stage directions, if the stage directions are included, or an audio description. The audio description usually is that non-audio content, that's visual content that happens in the video, that should be reflected on your transcript as well. So if you have, I use the example, you're in a counseling course and you're using a video of a counseling session, and the couple was just, yelling at each other, and the counselor's trying to mediate it, but all of a sudden there's no sound, and one member of the couple gets up and storms out, but there's no sound that goes along with that. Somebody who cannot see that is not going to know that by just listening to the sound. So that's why they need audio description, and that should be reflected on your transcript. Okay. All right. Implementation and practice. I'm going to go through these really quickly, guys. I think we've already talked about this quite a bit, because I have built a bunch of redundancy into these, slides, because I was trying to hammer home some points. But developing and refining your policy. Your policy is not a static document. Don't just leave it on a shelf. It needs to be looked at, it needs to be reviewed, and it needs to be revised because context changes. Okay. Questions to ask about ed tech. What is the tool going to be used for? Are there alternative means to teach this content? Got to tell you guys something. We were teaching math long before Pearson came up with My Math Lab. Our faculty sometimes forget that, but we were. And then also, who are our students? And I've talked a lot about our students, so I'm going to, go ahead and skip ahead. And if you have any questions, my information is on this deck, and Alex can certainly get it to you. I'm happy to follow up. Your question to ask vendors and partners, I talked about this a lot when we were looking at the accessibility rubric from One Ed Tech. I want to know, how are you using, considering accessibility in the design and development of your product? I want to know how you're testing for it. I want to know what your roadmap is. I want to know who I go to contact and who I contact when I find a problem. And I want to know what you're going to do about it. I am looking for these vendors and suppliers to become partners with us. We're not just a client and a customer. We have to be in here with, shared objectives, in terms of, making it better. What happens when it isn't accessible? So we talked about this earlier. There are times when an inaccessible piece of content is really critical for the learning objectives in that course. So if something is not accessible, we need to look at a couple of things. Number one, what are the learning objectives, and how can the student demonstrate mastery of those learning objectives through an alternative means? And what does that alternative means look like? This is where, if it's course content that you're getting from a publisher, it's important to work with them because they know how they've designed this, and then work with your academic colleagues to be able to have that plan ready at the time of adoption. Because I work at an institution where our courses are only 5 weeks long and students are taking one course at a time. If I don't know about a problem in week 2 until week 3, because that's when the student told me, I'm not going to have a solution until week 15, right? Potentially, and the course is long over. So we need to have those solutions up front. There's a couple of links on this page in terms of procurement. I've already talked about the importance of your procurement and strategic sourcing, however that unit is on at your institution as a partner. It's important to look at that. Do you have language on your contracts? We have standard accessibility language that indicates that we, want things at the WCAG, 2.1 AA standard. And let me tell you, attorneys love to redline it. And the process at my institution is we do not move forward with contract negotiations if there are red lines in the accessibility language until I have signed off on it. So, that's part of our process that I have to go in and review those. And then there are three, back in 2017 and 18, Cindy Rowland from WebAIM and I did a collaborative project with WCET and OLC on a year of accessibility. And we did several blog posts with guidance that still is applicable today around procurement. So please check those out. The professional development, don't assume your faculty and staff know anything about this. They probably don't, and they are probably freaking out. So practical, relevant, timely, really, really important. Also, how-tos are important, the student perspective and the student stories, and then how you're going to stock their toolbox and what those tools can be used for. And I apologize, I'm going through these really fast, but this is it. You guys remember Mr. Owl? Mr. Owl, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? What happens? 1, 2, crunch. Sometimes we look at accessibility and we think, gosh, it's really hard. And that's the exterior, the Tootsie Pop, right? It is hard. But then inside, there's that soft middle. And once you get through the hard parts, you get to that soft middle. But the other thing is, just like the Tootsie Pop and Mr. Owl, you can eat them in different ways. Right? You can suck on something to death like my father-in-law used to. Like that man used to put a peanut M&M in his mouth and he'd be sucking on it 2 hours later. And I'd be like, Dad, that's disgusting. But that's how he liked to consume them. But accessibility is a journey. It is not a destination. Your journey is going to look different. And you're never going to get up to a place of nirvana where you're going to say, I'm done. I say all the time that my job is to work myself out of a job, but the reality of it is I will never be without a job because everything changes. You have a new product update, you have new students, you have, the student has a change, the, institution, makes a change on this. You're never done. There's always something that comes up, but you make it incrementally better. And that's what's really important about it. And you learn from it and you apply those learnings going into something different. So this is my contact information. More than happy, for anyone to contact me offline. If there's anything that I can do, to help with all of this, more than happy to do that. I have a soft spot in my heart for SUNY, spent 12 years of my life at, SUNY and learned a lot, especially working with adult students. And I would not be in the position that I'm in today if I didn't have those experiences at SUNY. So I'm very grateful for that. And this is important work. All of you play a really important role in it. And I hope that you came away with something other than some extra calories from sugar. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I'm just gonna, can you?
Yeah. Oh, my pleasure.